Sons of the Morning. The Principalities' War, Book 1, Part 1. Christopher E. Pinto. Sons of the Morning, The Principalities' War, Book 1, Part 1. Copyright 2026 by Christopher E. Pinto. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the author, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or locales is entirely coincidental. Scripture quotations are taken from the New American Bible, Revised Edition, NABRE, copyright 2010, 1991, 1986, 1970. Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, Incorporated, Washington, D.C. All rights reserved. First edition. Printed in the United States of America. To the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. All glory belongs to you. For our struggle is not with flesh and blood, but with the principalities, with the powers, with the world rulers of this present darkness, with the evil spirits in the heavens. Ephesians 6:12, NABRE. Contents. Prologue. Tegucigalpa, 1987. 1. The Light That Came from the West. 2. Boyle Heights. 3. The Signal Beneath the Signal. 4. First Contact. 5. The First Conveyance. 6. Selected. 7. The Arrays. 8. The Prince of Persia. 9. Rodrigo's Bible. 10. What the Gift Costs. 11. Sariel Speaks to the World. 12. The First Meeting. 13. Zoe's First Session. 14. Caldo. 15. The Basement. 16. Pablo's Conversion. Prologue. Tegucigalpa, Honduras, March 1987. The city smelled of diesel and rain-wet earth and something sweeter underneath, something Rodrigo Perez could never name, but had always associated with the hour before dark, when the light went amber and the vendors on Avenida La Paz began folding their tarps, and the hills above the city turned the color of old copper. He had grown up breathing that smell. In 11 hours he would be gone. He sat on the edge of his cot in the room he had shared with his brother Cesar for 24 years and looked at what was left of his life, arranged on the floor in front of him. A duffel bag, olive green, an army surplus, bought for 3 lempiras from a man outside the market. 2 pairs of jeans folded, 4 shirts, a pair of work boots with new laces, a photograph of his mother taken at his cousin Ernesto's wedding, her face blurred slightly because she had turned to say something to someone just as the shutter clicked, so that she looked like a woman already in motion, already leaving. He kept it anyway. It was the only photograph he had of her where she was laughing. There was also the money. 180 American dollars, which had taken him 14 months to save working double shifts at the textile plant on the edge of the Comayagüela district. He had sewn it into the lining of the duffel bag with a needle and thread borrowed from his aunt, 3 bills at a time, pushing the needle through the canvas in the dark after Cesar was asleep, because Cesar would have asked questions Rodrigo did not yet have answers to. His cousin Ernesto, who had gone north 4 years ago and now worked construction in a place called Los Angeles, California, had told him to bring at least 100. Rodrigo was bringing 180 because he did not intend to come back. He was 22 years old. He had never been outside Honduras. He spoke no English beyond what he had memorized from a water-stained Berlitz phrasebook he found in the back room of the plant. "Good morning. Where is the bathroom? How much does this cost? I am looking for work." He had practiced these phrases so many times that he heard them in his sleep, spoken in his own voice with an accent he could already tell was wrong. The bus north left at 5 in the morning from the terminal on Boulevard Comunidad Económica Europea. He had his ticket. He had Ernesto's address written on a folded piece of paper tucked inside his shirt pocket, the ink already slightly smeared from a week of being pressed against his chest. He had everything he needed. What he had not yet done, what he had been putting off for 3 days with the quiet stubbornness of a man who knows he is stalling, was say goodbye to God. He was not sure that was the right way to put it. He was not leaving the faith the way a man leaves a bad job, with relief and a certain amount of resentment. It was more that he was aware, with a clarity that surprised him, that he was about to step into a life he did not know, in a country he did not know, and that whatever happened there, whatever he became there, would be shaped by what he carried with him across the border. And what he carried, underneath the jeans and the work boots and the sewn-in money, was a faith he had inherited from his mother, the way he had inherited her jawline and her stubbornness, without ever choosing it, without ever really examining it. It had always simply been there, the way the mountains were there, large and unmoving at the edge of everything. He thought, if I am going to carry it, I should know what I am carrying. The chapel of Santa Rosa de Lima was 4 blocks from the bus terminal. A small white building with a corrugated iron roof and a wooden cross above the door that had been painted blue so many times the blue had begun to peel away in long curving strips, revealing older blue underneath, then older blue still, all the way down to bare wood. Someone had set a pot of marigolds on the step. The door was unlocked, as it always was, as every church Rodrigo had ever known was unlocked before dark, because the people who needed them most did not always come during daylight. He went inside. The interior was small enough that the sound of his footsteps changed the room. 6 pews on each side of a narrow aisle, worn smooth and dark with decades of use, a wooden altar with a white cloth that was not quite white anymore, 2 candles burning in red glass holders, the flames barely moving in the still air. Above the altar, a crucifix, Christ in painted wood, head bowed, the colours faded to a softness that made the figure look both ancient and somehow closer than a more vivid image would have, as if the fading had worn away something between them. There was a woman in the second pew on the left, white hair, black dress, rosary moving through her fingers with the slow certainty of water over stone. She did not look up when Rodrigo entered. He was grateful for that. He chose a pew on the right, near the back, and sat down. He did not know how to begin. He had said prayers his entire life, grace before meals, the rosary with his mother on Sunday evenings, the responses at Mass. But those were communal things, shaped by other voices, held up by ritual the way a man is held up by the habit of walking. What he needed now was different. He needed to speak for himself. He needed to say in his own words, in the silence of this small room in the city he was leaving, what he actually believed. He folded his hands on the pew in front of him. He looked at the crucifix. He said, "Señor, I am going north tomorrow. I don't know what I will find there. I don't know if I will be the same man when I arrive as I am right now sitting in this church. I know what my mother taught me. I know that you are real. I know that your son died and rose again. I know that the Holy Spirit is present in the world and that he moves in ways I cannot always see. I know these things the way I know the way home, not because I have reasoned my way to them, but because I have lived inside them my whole life, and they have held." He paused. The candles held. The old woman's rosary moved. He said, "I am not asking you for money or success or even safety, though I would not refuse any of those things. What I am asking you for is this: let me build something true. Let whatever I make with my life over there, whatever I build with my hands or raise with my name, let it be something true. Let it last. Let it be worth the bus ticket." He stopped. He felt for a moment slightly foolish, a young man from Tegucigalpa asking God to make his emigration worthwhile, as if God kept accounts of bus tickets. But the feeling passed, because beneath it was something steadier, the sense that he had been heard, not dramatically, not with light or warmth or the kind of experience he had read about in the lives of the saints, simply the quiet, durable sense of a line open, of someone on the other end of it. He sat in the pew for a while longer. The old woman finished her rosary, rose without a sound, and left. Rodrigo remained. He looked at the crucifix, at the bowed head, the faded colours, the expression that the painter, whoever he had been, had managed to make neither agonised nor resigned, but something harder to name. Present, fully present, even here, even in this small chapel with the peeling door and the iron roof and the marigolds on the step. He thought about his mother. He thought about the way she had pressed his face between her palms when he told her he was leaving. Not weeping, not arguing, just holding his face and looking at him the way she looked at things she was memorizing. She had said, "Llévate a Dios, take God with you." He had told her he would. He had meant it the way young men mean things, generally without weight. Now, in this chapel, he meant it differently. He meant it the way a soldier means the thing he puts in his chest pocket before crossing into unknown country. He was outside again before he realized he had risen. The evening had deepened while he was inside, and the street was a different colour now. The amber gone and something quieter in its place, the blue-grey of the last light before dark. The marigolds on the chapel step were losing their colour in the dimness, going from orange to something pale and uncertain. He stood on the step for a moment and looked up at the cross. In the fading light, the blue paint looked almost black, the oldest layers absorbing the dark the way old wood does. He thought, "I will not see this cross again." The thought did not make him sad exactly, but it made him careful. The way you are careful with a thing you are about to put down for a long time and want to remember the weight of. He picked up his duffel from where he had left it, leaning against the chapel wall. He swung it onto his shoulder. He walked toward the terminal without looking back, not because he was indifferent to what he was leaving, but because he understood, in a way he could not have explained to anyone, that some things you carry better if you do not watch them recede. The bus to Guatemala City left on time. Rodrigo Perez sat in the third row from the back, the duffel across his knees, Ernesto's address against his chest. The city lights of Tegucigalpa rose and fell and disappeared behind the first mountain. He did not sleep. He watched the dark shape of Honduras going past the window and thought about the word his mother had used. Llévate. Take. Not remember God, not think of God. Take him. As if faith were not a concept but a thing you could put in a bag, carry across a border, unpack in a new country, and find still intact. He hoped she was right. He believed she was right. He had staked the next chapter of his life on it, which is, in the end, the only way to find out whether something is true. Somewhere over the Guatemalan border, long after the last lights of the city had disappeared, and the only light was the stars above the mountains, Rodrigo Perez fell asleep, with his hand resting on the duffel bag. In his chest pocket, the address. In the lining of the bag, the money. And somewhere underneath all of it, carried in the specific way that a man carries something he has decided to trust, the faith his mother gave him, smaller than he would have liked, more durable than he knew. 34 years later, his son would kneel on the floor of a parking garage in Los Angeles, hold a rosary in his fist, and speak the name that his father had carried across 3 borders in a canvas bag. And something in the darkness would recoil. But that is not this story yet. Chapter 1. The light that came from the west. The Meridian Grand was the kind of hotel that made its money being invisible. Not humble, nothing about a 22-story tower of imported Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling glass was humble, but invisible in the specific way that serious money prefers. No signs on the exterior beyond a small brass plate beside the door, no bellman in costume, no fountain in the lobby. Just space and light and the particular silence that costs more per square foot than most people's mortgages. The kind of place where the guests had learned long ago that drawing attention to yourself was the one thing money could not fix. Pablo Perez had been walking its perimeter for 4 hours. He moved through the service corridor on the hotel's 3rd floor with the unhurried, calibrated pace of a man who has learned that the way you move through a space tells people whether to notice you. Too fast and you become a problem. Too slow and you become a question. Pablo moved at exactly the speed of someone who belonged there and had somewhere specific to be, which was the speed of invisibility, which was in the end the job. The tech conference occupying the hotel's ballroom and 4 breakout suites was called Convergence West. 280 attendees, mostly venture-backed founders and the people who funded them, here for 3 days of panels and networking and the specific performance of casual confidence that the industry had elevated to an art form. Pablo had read the attendee manifest that morning. 12 names flagged by his client, a cybersecurity firm out of Culver City, as requiring elevated awareness. 3 of them were foreign nationals. One had a protective order filed against him in Santa Clara County that his publicist had managed to keep quiet. Pablo had memorized all 12 faces before breakfast. It was, by his own assessment, a routine job, the kind that paid the bills between the ones that didn't. He was 41 years old. He had done this work, private security consulting, which was the polished term for a set of skills that had less polished origins, for 7 years since leaving the army with a discharge that was honorable on paper and complicated in every other sense. He was good at it. He was good at it the way people are good at things that suit the particular shape of their damage. The hypervigilance that had made him a liability in relationships made him an asset in a room. The emotional distance that his ex-wife Carla had named, carefully and correctly, as the thing that ended their marriage was the same distance that allowed him to assess a threat in a crowded ballroom without his hands shaking. He had made a kind of peace with this. Most days. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He did not reach for it. He completed his sweep of the corridor. Fire exit secure, service elevator camera functional, the door to suite 312 still showing the privacy indicator that had been there since 2 in the afternoon, and then stepped into the alcove beside the housekeeping station and checked the screen. It was Zoe. The text read, "Dad, are you watching the news right now?" He typed back, "Working." "What is it?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then just turn on a TV, literally any TV. "Dad, please." He pocketed the phone and finished his circuit. The staff break room was on the 2nd floor, past the laundry and beside the electrical room, which meant it smelled faintly of warm metal and fabric softener, and the coffee that had been burning in the same pot since 6 that morning. There was a television mounted in the corner above the refrigerator, a 32-inch flat screen with a crack running diagonally across the lower left quadrant that someone had covered with a strip of electrical tape, as if the tape might help. 2 housekeeping staff were already in there when Pablo entered, a young woman he knew only as Marisol, who stopped in the middle of eating her sandwich and did not resume, and an older man named Dennis who had delivered Pablo's dry cleaning order to the wrong room that morning and had apologized 3 times about it. Neither of them looked up when he came in. They were looking at the television. Every channel was the same, not the same story, the same image. Pablo recognized this immediately as the thing that meant something had crossed a threshold, when the networks abandon their separate agendas and point every camera at one thing. The one thing is real. He had seen it twice before in his life. Once at 19 in his mother's living room in Boyle Heights, watching smoke rise from lower Manhattan in a September morning sky so clear it looked like something from a dream. Once at 31, at a forward operating base in Anbar Province, watching the news feed on a laptop while his team slept, and seeing the face of a man whose location he thought he knew, and understanding in the space of 10 seconds that he had been wrong, and that people were going to die because of it. Both times the thing on the screen had felt impossible. Both times it had not been. What was on the screen now felt more impossible than either of those things. The footage was aerial, shot from what looked like a Coast Guard helicopter judging by the camera angle and the quality of the stabilization, and it showed the Pacific Ocean approximately 60 miles west of Los Angeles in the last light of the afternoon. The water was dark and the sky above it was going purple at the horizon, and arranged across that horizon in a formation so precise it looked computer-generated were lights. Not aircraft lights. Pablo had spent enough time around aircraft to know the difference. These were steady, unblinking, the colour of something between white and gold that he did not have a word for, arranged in a pattern that repeated at intervals too regular to be anything that had evolved or been built by anything he knew of. He counted them without deciding to. 47 visible in the frame. The news chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Unidentified objects over Pacific, military scrambles, White House monitoring." Below that, in smaller text, rotating through updates, FAA grounds all commercial flights West Coast. NORAD confirms radar contact, President notified. Marisol had put her sandwich down on the table. She was holding the edge of the table with both hands, not gripping it, just resting her fingers there the way you rest your hand on a wall when the ground moves. Dennis said quietly to no one. Dios mío. Pablo watched for 58 seconds. He knew it was 58 seconds because he counted, the same way he counted everything, not obsessively, just as a habit of attention, a way of staying inside the moment rather than ahead of it. In those 58 seconds, the formation did not move. The lights did not flicker. The Coast Guard helicopter maintained its distance. The news anchor, a woman with a voice trained for authority who was not quite managing to sound authoritative, said the words unprecedented and extraordinary. And we want to be very careful not to speculate. And then speculated. Pablo turned away from the television and went back to work. He completed his 8 o'clock sweep of the conference floor and wrote his notes in the small moleskin he kept in his left breast pocket, because old habits from the army died slowly, and some of them he had decided not to kill. Suite 309, flagged attendee departed at 1947, returned at 2012, appeared unaccompanied. Ballroom east exit, lock functional, no tampering. Loading dock, cleared, truck manifest matches, delivery log. He wrote in a shorthand he had developed himself over years, economical to the point of being illegible to anyone else, which was the point. He did not write anything about the television. This was not denial. Pablo Perez was not, by temperament or by training, a man who practiced denial. Denial required a kind of energy he had never been able to spare. What he practiced instead was sequencing, the discipline of attending to what was in front of him before attending to what was not, of refusing to let the large and unresolvable crowd out the small and actionable. He had learned this in the army and refined it afterward, and it had served him better than most things he had learned in either place. What was in front of him was a conference floor with 280 attendees and 12 flagged names and a client who was paying him to be present in this building and not in his own head. What was not in front of him? What was 60 miles west over dark water, vast and unexplained and apparently real, could wait. This was what he told himself. It was not entirely true, and some part of him knew it was not entirely true, but it was functional, which in Pablo's experience was the best you could ask of most things you told yourself. His phone buzzed again at 8:17. He checked it in the elevator. Zoe, Dad, they're saying it might be extraterrestrial. Zoe, like, actually. Zoe, are you even reading these? He typed back. I read them. I'm working. A pause. Then, okay, but like, are you even a little bit freaking out right now? He considered this question with the seriousness it deserved, which was more than he would have admitted to anyone. He thought about the lights over the water. The formation too precise for weather, too vast for any technology he had knowledge of, too steady for anything that burned fuel. He thought about the way Marisol had put her sandwich down and not picked it back up. He thought about Dennis saying Dios mío in the voice of a man who meant it. He typed, no. He sent it. Then, after a moment, added, don't panic. Zoe, I'm not panicking. I'm amazed there's a difference. He put the phone back in his pocket and stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, where the Meridian Grand's guests were gathered in clusters around every screen, and the silence that the hotel had sold them on was gone, replaced by something he recognized from other places and other times, the sound of people trying to understand something that had just made their previous understanding of the world insufficient. He had been in rooms like that before. He knew what they felt like from the inside, and he knew what they looked like from the outside, and he preferred, when given the choice, to be on the outside looking in, not because he was unaffected, but because being unaffected was not the same as being useful, and useful was the only thing he knew how to be. He crossed the lobby to the concierge station, confirmed the evening security rotation with the night supervisor, and checked the parking structure cameras from the monitor behind the desk. Everything was where it was supposed to be. He signed off on the log at 9:51, collected his jacket from the coat check, and walked out through the hotel's side entrance into the warm Los Angeles night. The air on Figueroa Street smelled of exhaust and the ghost of someone's takeout, and underneath both of those, the dry herb scent of late September in Southern California, which was the smell of a city that had not rained in 4 months and was beginning to feel it. Pablo stood on the sidewalk and let his eyes adjust from the lobby's engineered light to the real dark, which in downtown Los Angeles was never fully dark. There was always the amber wash of streetlights and the white sweep of headlights and the blue flicker of screens visible through 100 windows. A city that could not stop looking at itself long enough to see anything else. He looked up anyway. The sky above downtown was its usual sulphurous non-color, too bright with reflected light to show much beyond the moon and the planets, and the few stars resilient enough to compete. He was not sure what he expected to see. The formation, whatever it was, had been 60 miles west over the ocean. Whatever was happening out there was not happening here yet. Yet. He noticed the word his mind had chosen and filed it without comment. He walked to the parking structure on 7th and retrieved his truck, a 2019 Ford F-150 dark grey, chosen for the same reasons he chose most things. It was reliable, it was unremarkable, it could carry what he needed it to carry. He sat in it for a moment before starting it, listening to the structure's ambient noise, the drip of water somewhere on a higher level, the distant compression of the elevator, and let himself briefly think about what he had seen on the television in the break room. 47 lights in a formation that did not move, 60 miles out over the Pacific, every network, NORAD confirming radar contact, which meant it was not a hoax and not a weather phenomenon and not a malfunction of any single system, because NORAD's whole purpose was to be the thing that could not malfunction on a night like this. He did not know what it was. He was honest enough with himself to sit with that fact without immediately filling it with something more comfortable. He did not know what it was. He was not panicking. He was not amazed, or rather he was doing the thing he always did with amazement, which was press it flat and store it somewhere below the operational level until he had the time and the safety to open it. He thought about calling Gloria. His older sister had a way of contextualizing the inexplicable that he had found irritating for most of his adult life, and that he found, tonight, in some distant and unexamined part of himself, something close to appealing. Gloria always had a framework. Her framework was God, which Pablo had long since concluded was either the most honest framework or the least falsifiable one, and he had never quite decided which. He did not call Gloria. He started the truck and pulled out of the structure and drove east on 7th, toward the 101, and the radio came on automatically because he had left it on when he parked, and every station was the same story, the same voices working through the same inadequate vocabulary, trying to say something true about something for which the true words had not yet been invented. He drove home in it. 40 minutes on the freeway, the city spreading out on every side of him, lit up and enormous and completely unaware of how small it had just become. Plus, his apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Edgware Road in Echo Park, a two-bedroom he had rented for 6 years and furnished with the minimum necessary to make it functional, and the maximum necessary to make it clear he was not trying to make it feel like home. A couch, a table, 4 chairs, because Zoe came on weekends and he had bought the extra chairs the week he moved in, before he had bought a second lamp, which told him something about himself that he tried not to examine too closely. He made coffee he did not need at 10:15 in the evening because he was not going to sleep any time soon, and he had long ago stopped pretending otherwise. He stood at his kitchen window with the mug and looked out at the neighborhood. The houses stepping down the hill below him, the lights of Silver Lake in the distance, the thin stripe of the reservoir visible between 2 apartment buildings. If you knew exactly where to look. He had memorized this view without meaning to. He knew every roof line. His phone rang at 10:30. He picked it up. Zoe. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Her voice was different from her texts, less kinetic, more careful. She had her mother's voice, low and precise, and she used it the same way Carla had, as an instrument of exactness rather than volume. "Are you home?" "Yeah, just got in." "Are you watching?" He looked at the television he had not turned on. "Not right now." A pause. "Dad, they're not moving. It's been like 6 hours and they haven't moved at all. The military flew jets out there and She stopped. The jets turned around, all of them. They just turned around and came back." Pablo said nothing. He set the coffee mug down on the window ledge. "Nobody knows what they are," Zoe said. "I mean, obviously nobody knows. But the way the scientists are talking, the ones they have on, they're not doing the thing where they carefully say it could be anything. They're not doing that. They're just kind of," she paused again, "quiet. They keep going quiet." "I know," Pablo said, although he had not known this specific detail, and the detail settled in him like a stone into water, not loudly, but with weight. Scientists going quiet, not theorizing, not competing for airtime with their frameworks. Quiet. "Are you scared?" Zoe asked. She asked it the way she asked him difficult questions, directly, without apology, watching for the answer he would give and the answer underneath it. He thought about the lights, the formation that had not moved in 6 hours, the jets that turned around. "No," he said. It was true as far as it went. What he was underneath the operational calm and the practiced sequencing and the coffee he didn't need, what he was in the place he rarely looked, was something closer to what Zoe had said on the phone an hour ago. Not panic, not fear exactly. Attention. The specific animal attention of a man who has learned to recognize the moment before something changes everything, and who is recognizing it now, and who does not yet have a name for what he is recognizing it as. "Don't panic," he said. He heard her smile, not a happy smile, a Zoe smile, the kind that meant she was deciding whether to let him get away with something. She let him get away with it. "Okay, Dad," she said, I love you." "Love you," he said. "Get some sleep." "You too." He hung up. He stood at the window for a while longer, with the cooling coffee and the familiar roof lines and the thin stripe of the reservoir. Then he picked up the remote and turned on the television. The lights were still there. 47 of them, steady over the dark water, going nowhere. They had been there for 7 hours. They would be there in the morning. Pablo Perez sat on his couch and watched them and did not sleep, and the city outside his window hummed and flickered with the particular restlessness of a place that has just discovered it is not the largest thing in the room. Chapter 2. Boyle Heights watches the sky. He had slept 3 hours. He knew this because he had watched the clock from the couch, not anxiously, just as a matter of record. And the last time he remembered seeing it, the numbers had read 2:47, and when he opened his eyes again, the light through the blinds was the flat grey of early morning, and his phone showed 5:53, and the television was still on. The lights still there, still not moving, as if they had been waiting for him to wake up. He showered and made fresh coffee and was on the 101 East by 6:30, which was earlier than he needed to be anywhere. He had no specific reason to drive to Boyle Heights that morning. No appointment, no obligation, just the pull of the place, which had always operated on him the way weather operates on old injuries. You do not decide to feel it. It simply makes itself known. The freeway was wrong. That was the first thing he noticed. Not empty. The 101 was never empty. Not at 6:30, not at 3 in the morning, not on Christmas. But the traffic moved with a different quality than usual. Slower and more deliberate. The way people drive when they are listening to something on the radio that has their full attention. Which, Pablo supposed, most of them were. He passed 3 accidents in 4 miles, all minor, all in the leftmost lane, all apparently caused by drivers who had been looking at their phones instead of the road. He noted this without judgment. He had looked at his phone 4 times since leaving his apartment. He took the Cesar Chavez exit and came down off the freeway into the neighborhood the way he always did, not thinking about it, the turns happening in his hands before his mind had. Finished forming them, the body's memory older and more reliable than the mind's. Left on Cesar Chavez, right on Soto. The taqueria on the corner that had been there since before he was born, its metal shutters still down, but the owner's truck already parked out front because Juan Gutierrez had opened at 5 every morning for 30 years, and apparently saw no reason to change that on account of an alien visitation. Past the elementary school with the mural of Cesar Chavez on its east wall. The painted face, slightly weathered now. The colours going soft at the edges. Past the church where his parents had been married, its front steps occupied this morning by 3 elderly women in house dresses who were looking at the sky and talking in rapid Spanish and did not look like they planned to stop any time soon. That was the second thing he noticed. People were outside. Not unusual for Boyle Heights. This was a neighborhood that lived on its front steps, that conducted its arguments and its celebrations and its grieving in the visible air, that had never fully adopted the Southern California habit of the sealed house and the private yard. But it was not yet 7 in the morning, and the people outside were not going anywhere. They were standing in driveways and on corners and in the small front yards behind chain-link fences, and almost all of them were either looking at their phones or looking at the sky, and the ones looking at the sky had the particular quality of stillness that Pablo associated with people who were trying to feel the size of something. A group of teenagers sat on the hood of a parked car outside a corner market, their faces lit blue-white from the phones in their laps, talking in the rapid overlapping way of people sharing information faster than they can process it. An older man, Pablo did not know him, but knew his type, the retired men who anchored the neighborhood's mornings, who knew everyone and everything and had opinions about both, stood at the edge of the sidewalk with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, looking west as if he could see 60 miles of city and ocean if he just kept looking long enough. And the women with the rosaries. He saw 3 of them in the first 2 blocks alone, Not together, not organized, just separately present in their separate doorways and on their separate patches of sidewalk, the beads moving through their fingers with the automatic rhythm of something practiced long enough to become as natural as breathing. He recognized the impulse even if he had long since stopped sharing it. When the world became too large, you reached for the thing that had always been larger than the world. He drove slowly. He did not honk. Nobody honked this morning. Perez and Sons auto-occupied a corner lot on Cesar Chavez Avenue that Rodrigo Perez had leased in 1994 with 3 months' savings and a handshake agreement with the building's owner, a Guatemalan man named Flores who had told Rodrigo he reminded him of himself 20 years earlier, which Rodrigo had taken as a compliment and a warning in equal measure. The shop had survived the Northridge earthquake, 2 recessions, a fire in the paint booth in 2003 that had taken the rear wall with it, and the death of its founder 4 years ago, which had taken considerably more. It was run now by Pablo's younger brother Mateo and their cousin Danny, who between them had their father's hands and half of his patience, which was enough. The roll-up door was open when Pablo pulled in. The shop smelled the way it had always smelled, motor oil and metal and the faint chemical sweetness of brake cleaner, and the smell hit him the way it always did, less like a memory than like a condition, something that changed the quality of his attention the moment he was inside it. He had grown up in this smell. He had done homework at the workbench in the corner, while his father's hands moved through an engine with the unhurried authority of a man who understood exactly what he was touching. He had learned more in this shop about how things worked and what it cost to fix them when they broke than he had learned in any classroom. Mateo was standing in the middle of the shop floor with his phone held horizontally in both hands, watching a video with the volume low enough to be considerate and high enough that Pablo could hear the news anchor's voice before he reached the door. He was 37 years old, 4 years younger than Pablo, and had their father's build, broad through the shoulders, compact, the kind of physical presence that suggested he had spent his life doing things with his hands, which he had. He had also, Pablo noted, not opened a single bay or pulled a single car from the lot, which meant he had been standing there watching his phone since he arrived, which meant he had been there for at least an hour doing nothing, which for Mateo was a detail as remarkable as anything on the news. "Hermano," Pablo said. Mateo looked up. His face did the thing it always did when he was surprised and pleased simultaneously, a kind of unlocking, the guard coming down before he remembered to keep it up. The brothers had never discussed the fact that Mateo worked to keep his guard up around Pablo, but they both knew it was there, and both knew why, and the knowing without discussing had become its own kind of shorthand between them. "You're here early," Mateo said. "Couldn't sleep." Nobody could sleep. Mateo held up the phone as if offering it as evidence. "You see this? They've been there all night, like stationary. The whole night, bro, they haven't moved a meter." "I know. And the jets, did you see what they did with the jets? They sent up 6 F-22s from Edwards, and they just..." Mateo made a gesture with his hand, a smooth arc that turned back on itself. "Came home, all 6 of them. Just turned around. There's footage. Someone got it on video from the ground. You can see them banking away." He shook his head, but not in the way people shake their heads at bad news. In the way they shake their heads at something that has exceeded their available categories for response. "This is it, Pablo. You know that, right? This is the thing." "What thing?" Pablo asked, though he knew what Mateo meant. He asked because he wanted to hear how his brother said it, what framework he would reach for, what shape he would give to the shapeless. Matteo spread his hands. The thing, the big thing, first contact, the moment that changes everything before it and after it. I'm telling you, bro. He paused, and Pablo saw something cross his brother's face that was not the excitement he had expected, but something underneath it, something more complicated. I've been standing here since I got in, just thinking about Papa. You know, like, what would he have said? What would he have done? Pablo was quiet for a moment. The shop made its small sounds around them. Somewhere on Cesar Chavez, a car alarm went off and then stopped. He would have come in here, Pablo said finally, opened the first bay and started working, and then he would have turned on the radio loud enough to hear the news and worked through it. Matteo considered this, then reluctantly, yeah, he would have. He looked at his phone, then at the empty bays, then at Pablo. I've got a Camry coming in at 8 for a timing belt. There you go, Pablo said. Matteo pocketed the phone with the visible effort of a man putting down something he intends to pick up again very shortly. You want coffee? Danny made a pot. I'm good. He stayed for 20 minutes, leaning against the workbench while Matteo pulled the Camry's file and prepped the first bay with the slightly self-conscious efficiency of a man performing competence for an audience he respects. They talked about the shop's accounts receivable, which were behind in the way they were always behind in the slow weeks between summer and the holidays. They talked about their cousin Danny's new girlfriend, whom Matteo had met and described as very nice with a tone that conveyed significant reservations about the very nice. They did not talk about the lights over the Pacific because they had already said what they had to say about the lights over the Pacific, and both of them understood that the rest of it, the part that mattered, the part underneath the facts, was not something that could be talked about yet. It needed more time. It needed more information. It needed, perhaps, for the lights to do something other than sit there and be impossible. Plus, the building where Rosario Perez had lived for the last 18 years of her life was 4 blocks from the shop, a 2-story stucco apartment complex on Fickett Street with a small courtyard in the centre that she had spent 20 years filling with potted plants until it looked less like a courtyard and more like a decision. She had grown tomatoes and chilies and mint in a rose bush that had no business thriving in a concrete courtyard in East Los Angeles and had thrived anyway, which her neighbour Mrs. Delgado attributed to the quality of the soil amendment Rosario used, and which Pablo had always privately attributed to something less explicable. He had not been back since the week after her funeral, 14 months ago. He was not sure why he came now. He parked on the street and sat in the truck for a moment looking at the building's front gate, the bougainvillea growing over the fence that had always been there, the potted cactus by the mailboxes that he recognized as one of Rosario's, still alive, apparently claimed by no one and abandoned to its own considerable endurance. He went in through the gate. The courtyard was quieter than he expected. Only one person there, Mrs. Delgado herself, 74 years old and built like someone who had been arguing with the world for all of those 74 years and winning most of the arguments. She was sitting in her folding chair with her hands in her lap, looking up. Not at her phone, just up at the sky above the courtyard, which was a rectangle of pale morning blue framed by the building's roof lines. She noticed him before he spoke. She always had. Rosario had once said that Elena Delgado knew when someone entered the courtyard, the way a spider knows when something touches its web, which Rosario had meant as a compliment. "Pablito," Mrs. Delgado said. Nobody had called him that in 14 months. The word landed somewhere between his sternum and his throat and stayed there. "Senora Delgado, how are you?" She made the gesture that meant the question was too large for the answer available. "Sitting here thinking about your mother," she said. Her English was careful and complete, assembled from decades of practice. "She always said something was coming. Did you know that? Not like this, maybe, but something. She said she had felt it for years, like a change in the pressure before rain." Pablo sat down on the low wall beside the rose bush. The rose bush was in bloom, small, deep red flowers, the colour almost impossibly saturated in the flat morning light. "She said that to you?" "Many times, the last year especially." Mrs. Delgado folded her hands in her lap. She was not afraid of it, whatever it was. She was prepared, I think. She prayed more in that last year than I have ever seen a person pray, and I have known some very serious people. A pause. "She prayed for you especially. Every morning I could hear her through the wall. 5 o'clock. Your name." Pablo looked at the rosebush. He did not say anything for a moment. There was nothing available to say that would have been adequate to the moment, and he had learned long ago that inadequate words were worse than silence. She was a woman who knew things, Mrs. Delgado said, not sentimentally, as a statement of observed fact, the way she might note that the building's plumbing was unreliable, or that the market on 4th had the best avocados on the block. Whatever is out there over the ocean, I don't know what it is, but I think she knew it was coming, and I think she knew you would need to be ready for it. "Ready how?" Pablo asked. He asked it lightly, the way he asked things he actually wanted to know the answer to, carefully, without signalling that he wanted to know. Mrs. Delgado looked at him with the patient assessment of a woman who had known him since he was 9 years old, and was not fooled by his lightness. "You'd have to ask her," she said. "But I think you already know the answer to that, Pablito. I think your mother made sure of it." He stayed another few minutes. They talked about the building's new management company, which Mrs. Delgado found lacking in several specific and articulately expressed ways. He watered Rosario's cactus from the courtyard tap because it looked like no one had, in a while. When he left, Mrs. Delgado was still in her folding chair, still looking at the sky, her hands folded with the same stillness as the women with the rosaries on the street. He understood, watching her, that they were all doing the same thing in different languages, reaching, in their various ways, for something larger than what the morning had handed them. He got back in the truck. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. "Your mother made sure of it." He turned the sentence over, the way you turn over a stone to see what is underneath. And what he found underneath it was the box in his storage unit with the Bible and the rosary, and the letter he had not opened, and the specific weight of knowing they were there, which was a weight he had been carrying for 14 months without deciding to, and without putting it down. He started the truck. He had somewhere to be. Carla lived in Monterey Park, 20 minutes east, a house she had bought 4 years ago with the settlement from the car accident that had broken her wrist and her patience with Los Angeles traffic simultaneously. A small stucco 3-bedroom on a quiet street of small stucco 3-bedrooms that she had made, against the odds of the neighborhood's uniformity, distinctly her own. There were window boxes. There was a lemon tree in the side yard that she had planted herself, and that was now large enough to provide actual lemons, which she gave to her neighbours in bags, and which her neighbours received with the mixture of gratitude and mild bewilderment that attends unexpected abundance. Pablo had not called ahead. This was, he acknowledged to himself as he parked, not ideal. He and Carla had arrived, over the 4 years since the divorce, at an arrangement that was functional and occasionally even warm, built on a shared commitment to Zoe's well-being and a mutual understanding that the things that had ended their marriage were not things that could be religitated productively, which had required from both of them a degree of discipline that Pablo respected more the longer he thought about it. Dropping by unannounced on a morning when the world had possibly just made contact with an extraterrestrial civilization was not fully consistent with the spirit of that arrangement. Carla answered the door in a robe, coffee in hand, with the expression of someone who had been awake most of the night and had made peace with it. She was 40 years old and looked it in the specific way that Pablo had always found more compelling than the alternative, not despite the years but made of them, her face carrying the accumulated evidence of raising a daughter, mostly alone, and building a career in medical billing and surviving a marriage that had been, when it was good, genuinely good. Pablo. Morning, sorry, I should have called. She shook her head in a way that meant it was fine and also that she noted the should have. Zoe's up. She's been up since 4. Come in. The house smelled of coffee and the particular morning smell of a home that was actually lived in. Toast, fabric softener, someone's shampoo. Pablo stood in the entry while Carla went to get Zoe and looked at the photographs on the hallway wall, which he always looked at and never commented on. There were pictures of Zoe at every age, Zoe at 2, round-faced and astonished by everything, Zoe at 7, missing both front teeth, Zoe at 12 in the middle of a painting she was making that was larger than she was. There were pictures of Carla's family. There was, he noticed, one photograph of himself. Not a posed one, a candid, taken at Zoe's 8th birthday, him and Zoe at the kitchen table with her birthday cake between them, both of them looking at the cake, and not the camera. He did not know Carla had kept it. He did not say anything about it. Zoe appeared at the end of the hall like a weather event. She was 16 and had been, for as long as Pablo could remember, constitutionally incapable of moving through space quietly. Not clumsily. She was not clumsy. She moved with the unself-conscious physical ease of someone who had spent her childhood in motion, but with a kind of presence that announced itself, the way certain frequencies of light make themselves known even when they are not the brightest thing in the room. She was wearing paint-stained sweatpants and a t-shirt from a museum she had visited on a school trip 3 years ago and had never stopped wearing, and she was carrying her sketchbook the way she always carried it. Not consciously, just present in her hand, an extension of the arm. Dad. She said it like a fact she was confirming. Hey, Mija. She covered the length of the hall in about 4 steps, and the sketchbook was in her left hand, and her right arm went around him, and he held her for a moment the way he held her every time, with the specific and inarticulate fierceness of a man who is better at this than he is at most things and knows it, and is grateful for it. You drove out here, she said into his shoulder. I was in the neighborhood. She pulled back and looked at him with Carla's look, the one that meant she was reading past the surface of what he said to the thing underneath it. You were in Boyle Heights at 7 in the morning. I was in the neighborhood eventually. She almost smiled. Almost. Have you been watching? They still haven't moved. Not even a little. I've had the live stream up on my laptop all night, Dad. I couldn't stop watching. It's like... She opened her sketchbook, and there they were, page after page of the lights, not copied from the news footage, not transcribed, interpreted. She had drawn the formation in charcoal and, in pen, from different angles in different scales, and in each version she had done something different with the space around the lights, given the darkness a texture and a depth that made the lights look not like objects in space, but like windows in something, like apertures opening onto somewhere else. Pablo looked at the drawings for a long time without speaking. "What does it feel like to you?" Zoe asked. "Not what you think it is. What does it feel like?" He considered the question with the seriousness she deserved. He looked at her drawings, the darkness with texture, the lights like windows, the way she had made the formation seem not like a thing hovering above the water, but like a thing hovering at the edge of something, a threshold, a door that had not yet opened. "Like the moment before," he said. "Before what?" "I don't know yet," he said. "That's the part I don't know yet." She looked at him. Something moved in her face, something quick and searching. The way she looked at things she was deciding whether to draw. He had the sudden and uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing him more clearly than he was seeing himself, which was something she had done since she was about 4 years old and had never entirely stopped. Plus, he drove her back to Boyle Heights because she wanted to see the neighborhood and because he wanted the company, though he would not have said that in those words. She sat in the passenger seat with her sketchbook open and added details to one of the drawings as they moved through traffic. He could see her hand moving in his peripheral vision, quick and certain, the pen finding its mark without her looking down at the page. The radio was on. It was always the same story, repackaged every 15 minutes with new language for the same absence of new information. The objects had not moved. The military had not approached. The White House had issued a statement describing the situation as being monitored closely and urged calm, which was the statement that governments issued when they did not know what else to say and knew that saying nothing was worse. "The president looked scared," Zoe said, not looking up from the sketchbook. "When?" "His statement last night. I watched it like 5 times. He kept doing this thing with his jaw like a clenching, and his eyes went to something off camera twice, like he was checking if he was saying the right thing. He was scared." Pablo glanced at her. "You watched it 5 times looking for that?" "I watch everything multiple times," she said, as if this were self-evident, which for her it was. "You can't see things the first time. The first time you're just getting oriented. You have to watch again to actually see." He thought about this. He thought about the break room and the 58 seconds and the way he had turned away from the television and gone back to work. He thought about the difference between his daughter's instinct, watch again, watch more, look until you actually see, and his own, which was the instinct to act, to move, to keep the hands occupied while the mind worked on its own time. His phone rang through the truck's speakers. The screen on the dash showed Gloria. Zoe looked at the dash and then at him with a raised eyebrow that meant she thought he should answer it, and also that she was going to be listening. He answered it. "Glow." Gloria's voice came through the speakers with the particular quality it had when she was praying or had just stopped praying. Lower than usual, very still, like water that has stopped moving but has not lost any of its depth. "Hermano, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Zoe's with me. Zoe, Mija, a warmth in the two words. Zoe said, "Hi, Tia Gloria." "Gloria, I was going to call you," Pablo said, which was almost true. He had thought about calling her, which was closer than he usually got. "I know," she said. And he could hear in the two words that she was not being arch about it. She meant it simply, the way she meant most things. "I've been praying since before dawn. I woke up at 3 and I knew I needed to pray. I called the women from my group and we've been on a call together. Tomas thinks I've lost my mind. Tomas always thinks that. He married me anyway." A pause. "Pablo, did you see what they said on the news this morning? Sariel, that's what they're calling the one who communicated, through the radio signals. His name is Sariel." "I saw," Pablo said. The name had come out of the news cycle around 3 in the morning. Not spoken by the visitors, but decoded by a linguistics team at JPL from a repeating signal the formation had been broadcasting since it arrived. Sar-il. The name had run through the internet in hours. "Do you know what that name is?" Gloria asked. Her voice had not changed, but something in it had sharpened, the way a lens sharpens when you turn the focus ring. "Tell me." "It's angelic. It's one of the names from the angelic hierarchy. An angel of death in some traditions, an angel of the moon in others." She paused. "It's a name someone would choose if they wanted people who knew scripture to recognize it. And also a name someone would choose if they wanted everyone else to find it beautiful." Pablo was quiet. Beside him, Zoe had stopped drawing. "Gloria," he said carefully, "you're saying they chose it deliberately. I'm saying it's worth asking why that name. Out of all possible signals, out of all possible sounds, why a name from the angelic tradition of 3 of the world's major religions?" Her voice remained entirely calm. This was the thing about Gloria that had always unsettled him slightly. She did not perform her convictions. She held them at room temperature, which somehow made them more difficult to dismiss than if she had been excitable about them. "Pablo, I want you to look up Deuteronomy 13, verses 1 through 3. When you have a moment, just read it." "Okay," he said. "I love you, Hermano. Love you, Glow." The call ended. The radio filled the space it left. The announcer was saying that the formation had still not moved, and that the president would address the nation at noon, and that markets in Asia had opened down significantly, but not catastrophically, which was apparently the calibration they were working with. Zoe said quietly, "Deuteronomy 13. "Yeah, what is it?" "I don't remember," he said, which was true. He had the general shape of it, something about signs and wonders, about false prophets, but not the words. The words had gone the way most of what he had learned in CCD had gone, somewhere between his mother's house and the army, into the large, undifferentiated storage of things he had once known and no longer needed. "Will you look it up?" He glanced at her. She was looking at him directly, the sketchbook closed in her lap, her pen still in her hand. "Yeah," he said, "I will." He did not look it up that day, but he thought about it. He thought about it the way you think about a door you have passed without opening, not urgently, not with intention, just with the peripheral awareness that it is there, and that on the other side of it is something you have not yet decided whether you want to see. He dropped Zoe back at Carla's in the early afternoon, after they had walked the length of Cesar Chavez and eaten at the taqueria. which had opened after all and was doing its best business in years because people needed somewhere to be that was warm and familiar and had good food and other people in it, which was what the taqueria had always been. They had talked about her art program at school and about a book she was reading and about the fact that the lights were still there, which they circled back to the way you circle back to a word you can't stop saying. And each time they came back to it, there was a little less to say about it, which paradoxically made it feel larger. He hugged her at Carla's front door. She held on for an extra beat, brief, almost imperceptible, but he felt it. He said goodbye to Carla, who was standing in the doorway with her coffee and looked at him with the particular expression she sometimes had, which he had never entirely decoded. Something between assessment and something else that he had stopped trying to name. He drove back west through the early afternoon traffic with the radio off for the first time all day, just the sound of the city and the freeway and his own breathing. He thought about his father leaving Honduras with $180 sewn into a duffel bag and arriving in a city that did not speak his language and building something true in it anyway. He thought about Rosario at 5 a.m, his name in her mouth like a prayer, which it was. He thought about a door. Above the freeway, the sky was its usual washed-out LA blue, the sun already high and bright and indifferent, the mountains faint in the haze to the north. The lights were 60 miles west, invisible in daylight, present on every screen. They had been there for 15 hours. By the time Pablo reached his apartment, they had been there for 16. He went upstairs, unlocked his door, and stood in the entry of his functional, barely furnished apartment, and looked across the room at the closet door behind which was the storage unit, behind which was the box with the Bible and the rosary and the letter. And he looked at it for a long moment, and then he went into the kitchen and made coffee, and did not open it. Chapter 3. JPL, Pasadena. Naomi Voss had not gone home. This was not unusual. She had a cot in the back of her office for the weeks when a project demanded the kind of sustained attention that commuting interrupted, and she had used it often enough over the past 11 years at JPL that the facilities staff had stopped asking about it, and simply included her office in the cleaning rotation for rooms with overnight occupants. She kept a change of clothes in the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, a toothbrush and travel toiletries in the cabinet above her desk, and a French press on the windowsill that she preferred to the break room's industrial machine, because the break room's machine made coffee that tasted like a decision someone had regretted. What was unusual about this particular night was that she had not used the cot. She had sat at her desk from 8 p.m. until the sun came through the east window, and she had not slept, and she had not felt the need to. The monitors in front of her showed the same thing every monitor in every building on the JPL campus showed: the formation, the telemetry, the ongoing cascade of data from every sensor array they had pointed at the Pacific in the last 16 hours. There was a great deal of data. It was, in aggregate, the most extraordinary scientific data set in human history, and Naomi had spent the night working through it with the methodical intensity she brought to all problems that mattered, and what she had found in it, or rather what she had found herself unable to find in it, had kept her in her chair until morning. What she had been unable to find was noise. Every object that moved through space or held position in atmosphere made noise in the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio emissions, thermal signatures, the electromagnetic chatter of systems generating power, whether those systems were turbines or ion drives or anything else human science had imagined or built. The formation over the Pacific was generating none of it. Zero thermal differential from ambient, zero radio emission across every frequency her instruments could reach, zero gravitational distortion in the water below, which meant whatever was keeping 47 objects stationary 60 miles offshore was not operating on any principles she could locate in the literature. There was, however, one signal, a single narrow-band transmission in the VLF range, very low frequency, the part of the spectrum used for communicating with submarines, for navigational beacons, for certain geological monitoring applications. The signal carried the repeating pattern that the linguistics team had decoded as SAR-IEL, which the internet had been running with since 3 in the morning. But underneath that signal, embedded in it, woven through its carrier wave with a precision that had taken Naomi 4 hours to isolate and another 2 to confirm, was something else. A second signal, much lower, below the threshold of the standard analysis filters that her colleagues had run through the data. Below the threshold, she was nearly certain, of human hearing. She had been staring at it for 2 hours. She had not yet decided what to do with it. Plus, her name was Naomi Grace Voss, and she had grown up in Fresno, California, the second of 4 children in a family that was evangelical Christian, in the specific way of people for whom faith is not a Sunday institution, but a daily operating system. Present in the morning devotionals her father led at the kitchen table before school, present in the way her mother spoke about difficulty, as something that was happening for a reason rather than to evict him, present in the texture of ordinary decisions, what they ate and how they spent their money and which movies they watched and how they treated the people they disagreed with. She had never rebelled against this. This was, she knew, not the expected narrative for a woman with a PhD in astrobiology from Caltech who worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and spent her days searching the universe for evidence of life. The expected narrative involved a crisis of faith in college, a painful rupture, a gradual replacement of the old certainties with the clean, hard edges of scientific materialism. She had watched colleagues travel that road and she understood its logic, and she had never travelled it herself. For a reason she had worked out slowly over years and could now state simply, she did not find science and faith to be in competition. She found them to be in conversation. The universe was vast and ordered and astonishingly fine-tuned for the existence of life, and every year she spent studying it, the vastness and the order and the fine-tuning became more rather than less remarkable to her, and she saw no reason why the existence of a creator who had made it that way should be less intellectually satisfying than the alternative, which required her to believe that the extraordinary improbability of everything she observed was simply the way things had happened to turn out. She had colleagues who found this reasoning insufficient. She respected them. She had stopped arguing with them years ago, not because she lacked arguments, but because the argument was never really about the evidence. She was 38 years old. She had been at JPL for 11 years, the last 4 as the lead of the biosignature detection and analysis team, which was a title that sounded more consequential than it had felt most days, because what the team mostly did was analyze data from instruments on spacecraft that were very far away from anything interesting and wait for something to change. She had been, she would have said 6 months ago, patient by temperament and patient by practice and pretty much at peace with the waiting. 6 months ago, there had been nothing to wait for. Now there was this, 47 objects over the Pacific and a signal she could not account for, and a building full of colleagues who were, this morning, operating at a pitch of excitement that she recognized and did not share. and the feeling she had had since the formation first appeared on her monitors 16 hours ago, which she had not yet named to herself, but which was sitting in her chest like something swallowed wrong. Plus, the hallway outside her office was louder than it had ever been at 7 in the morning. She could hear it through the door, voices overlapping, someone laughing, the particular high-frequency hum of a large group of people who have not slept and are running on adrenaline, and the conviction that they are present at a historic moment, which they were, which was not in question, which was also not the whole story. She made herself a cup of coffee from the French press and sat on the edge of her desk and looked out the east window at the San Gabriel Mountains, which were doing what they always did, sitting there, immovable and indifferent and magnificent, the same this morning as every other morning, which she found, for reasons she could not fully articulate, comforting. Her door opened without a knock. This was Marcus Webb's habit, and she had never successfully trained him out of it. He was 45, her closest colleague on the floor, a radio astronomer who had been at JPL for 20 years and who approached every scientific problem with the same quality of delighted aggression that some people brought to competitive sport. He was also, she was fond of saying privately, the most consistently wrong person she had ever worked with, who was also consistently brilliant, a combination that kept their collaboration productive and occasionally exhausting. He looked this morning like a man who had won something. "Tell me you've been looking at the spectral data," he said, already moving toward her secondary monitor without being invited to. "I have been looking at the spectral data. Then you've seen the emission profile, or the lack of one, which is the point. There is no emission profile, Naomi. These things are thermally invisible, which means whatever is powering them is operating on a principle we have never observed, which means—" He turned to face her with the expression of a man about to say something he has wanted to say his entire career. "This is it. This is first contact. This is the thing we've been doing all of this for." Naomi looked at him. She liked Marcus. She liked his enthusiasm and his speed, and the way he never stopped being surprised by things. She also knew him well enough to know that his enthusiasm, unchecked, had a way of running ahead of the evidence by just enough to matter. "I've been looking at the spectral data," she said again, more carefully. "What have you done with the VLF component?" He blinked. "The carrier wave for the name signal. Standard filter, it's clean, there's nothing." "Below the filter," she said. "Run it below the standard floor. Below 12 hertz." A pause. The look on his face shifted from triumph to something more cautious. "What did you find?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's what I've been trying to work out since 2 in the morning. But there's something there, Marcus. Something riding below the primary signal that doesn't match any natural phenomenon in the literature and doesn't match any artificial source I can identify. It's structured. It's not noise." He stared at her for a moment, and she watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. The weighing of what he wanted this to be against what she was telling him it might also be. She respected him enough not to rush it. "Could be a secondary communication channel," he said finally. "Something they're transmitting on a different band simultaneously. Not unusual for complex signal architectures." "Could be," she agreed. "That's one possibility. I have some others." "What others?" She turned back to her monitor and pulled up the neurological mapping analysis she had been running since 4 in the morning. "Come look at this." He came and looked. She walked him through it, the frequency profile of the subthreshold signal, the correlation analysis she had run against published research on infrasound and its effects on human neurology, the specific match she had found in a 2019 paper out of the University of Gothenburg on low-frequency acoustic suppression of the default mode network. The default mode network, the part of the brain that activated during self-reflection, during moral reasoning, during the processing of social and spiritual experience, the part that, when suppressed by chronic low-frequency exposure, produced in test subjects a measurable decrease in what the Gothenburg researchers had clinically termed self-transcendent ideation. And what? Naomi, reading their data at 4 a.m, had recognized immediately by a different name, the capacity for faith. Marcus was quiet for a long time after she finished, longer than she had expected. He was looking at the screen and not at her, and she gave him the time because she had needed time with it too, and it was only fair. "It's a frequency match," he said finally. "It's not proof of intent." "No," she agreed. "It's not. It could be incidental, a byproduct of their propulsion system, their power source, something structural. It doesn't mean they're deliberately—" He stopped. "I know," she said. "I'm not drawing a conclusion. I'm noting a correlation that I think warrants further analysis before we assume the best about what we're dealing with." She paused. "That's all I'm saying, Marcus. Warrant further analysis." He nodded slowly. He looked like a man who had opened a door expecting one room and found another room behind it. "I'll run the sub-threshold analysis on our own data," he said, "independently." "Good," she said. "Thank you." He left without his usual energy, which was, she thought, probably the right response to what she had just shown him. She turned back to her monitors and refilled her coffee, and sat with the data and the mountains and the feeling in her chest that she still had not named. The notification came at 9:47, an email from the office of the NASA administrator, flagged urgent, addressed to a list of 12 JPL scientists, including Naomi, informing them that they had been selected as part of a scientific advisory team that would be transported to Edwards Air Force Base that afternoon. No further details about what they would find there. No explanation of the selection criteria. Though Naomi could make an educated guess, she was the lab's lead on biosignature detection, which made her the closest thing JPL had to a specialist in looking for life that was not Earth life, which apparently qualified her for whatever was about to happen at Edwards. She read the email twice. Then she sat still for a moment, her hands in her lap, looking at the mountains through the east window. The thing in her chest had a name now. She had been working around it since the formation first appeared, and the sub-threshold signal had brought it closer, and the email from the NASA administrator had brought it the rest of the way. The name was not fear, though there was some of that. It was not excitement, though there was some of that too. The name was, as precisely as she could put it, the specific alertness of someone who has been taught to recognize deception and is recognizing something. She did not know yet what she was recognizing it as. The data was insufficient. The correlation was not proof. Marcus was right that intent could not be inferred from frequency match alone. She knew all of this. She was a scientist. She held her conclusions loosely and revised them as the evidence required. This was her training and her discipline, and she trusted it. She also trusted the other thing, the thing that was older than her training and ran underneath it the way the sub-threshold signal ran underneath the primary broadcast. Present, structured, not noise. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and took out the Bible. It was a paperback NABRE, well used, the spine cracked in multiple places from years of being opened flat, with a system of coloured tabs along the edges that represented a filing system she had developed in graduate school and refined over time. She did not open it. She just set it on the desk beside her keyboard, the way you set a tool within reach before you know exactly which task you will need it for. Then she sat at her desk and prayed. Not formally. She had never been a formal prayer, had never fully adopted the vocabulary of structured liturgical prayer, though she respected it and understood its architecture. She prayed the way she had prayed since she was a child, which was to say she prayed the way she talked, directly, without decoration, saying the thing she actually meant. She said, "Lord, I am going to Edwards this afternoon, and I do not know what I will find there. I know what everyone else seems to think they will find, a miracle, a gift, proof that we are not alone. And maybe that is what it is. I am not deciding in advance, but I am asking you, right now, before I get on that helicopter and stand in front of whatever is out there, give me eyes to see what this actually is, not what I want it to be, not what the world needs it to be, what it actually is." She stopped. The office was quiet. From the hallway she could hear her colleagues, the voices, the movement, the sustained collective hum of people operating at the edge of their capacity for wonder. She said, "I am asking in the name of Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life, and in whom I trust above everything I can measure or map or model. Amen." She sat quietly for a moment after. Then she opened her eyes and looked at the Bible on her desk, and at the data on her monitors, and at the mountains through the east window. Still there, still immovable. She began packing her field bag. She packed methodically, the way she packed for any field deployment, equipment first, then personal items, then the things that didn't fit either category. Her acoustic analysis laptop with the external drive containing the sub-threshold data. The portable spectrum analyzer she had spent 3 years calibrating to a sensitivity margin that still occasionally embarrassed her colleagues. A recorder. 2 notebooks, one for data, one for everything else, because she had learned in graduate school that the most important observations often arrived in the register that did not fit the official record. She packed the Bible last. She slid it into the side pocket of the field bag, which was sized for a water bottle, and it fit with room to spare, which she noted absently. She had carried it into more field deployments than she could count, and it had never taken up more room than it needed. Marcus appeared in her doorway as she was zipping the bag. He had the expression of a man who had run the sub-threshold analysis independently and confirmed the result and was not entirely sure what to do with that. "You confirmed it," she said. He nodded. Then, "You're on the Edwards team?" "Yes." "I'm not." He said it without obvious feeling, but she knew him well enough to hear what was underneath it. Not resentment exactly, something closer to unease. As if not being on the team was, in this particular circumstance, something other than a disappointment. "Marcus?" "Yeah." The sub-threshold signal. Don't bury it in the analysis. Don't let it get lost in the excitement. Keep working it. He looked at her for a moment. He was a man who loved being the first person to find things, which meant he also, when it mattered, knew how to take direction from someone who had found something first. "Yeah," he said. "I will." "Good." She picked up her field bag and the acoustic laptop and her badge and her coffee, which was still half full, and walked out into the hallway. The building was running at a frequency she had never felt in it before. not the hum of normal operation, but something higher and less stable, the frequency of collective anticipation, of an entire institution arriving at the edge of the thing it had been built to face, and finding the edge larger than expected. She passed 3 separate conversations about what the visitors might want: medical technology, energy, knowledge. Her colleagues were already in the transaction, already mentally negotiating the terms of an exchange that had not yet been proposed by the other party, which was, she thought, a very human habit, and not necessarily a safe one. She did not stop to join any of the conversations. She walked to the parking structure and got in her car and drove to the helipad at the edge of the campus, where 3 other members of the advisory team were already waiting, all of them with the look of people who had not slept and did not care. The helicopter took them west over the San Gabriel Valley, over the low sprawl of the suburbs and the thin thread of the 210 freeway, and the gradual thinning of the city into the dry brown hills of the Antelope Valley, toward Edwards and whatever waited there. The other scientists talked. She watched the terrain below and drank the last of her coffee and thought. She thought about the sub-threshold signal and what it meant if the frequency match was not incidental, if it was structural, built into the transmission deliberately, calibrated to the specific neurological profile of the human brain. If every broadcast the formation had sent in the past 16 hours had been carrying, underneath the name, underneath the communication, something that was quietly doing something to the people receiving it. She thought about what the Gothenburg researchers had found in their test subjects after chronic low-frequency exposure: the reduction in self-transcendent ideation, the flattening of what they had measured as moral emotional resonance, the capacity to feel the weight of ethical questions, to experience conscience as something with texture and resistance rather than as a formality. The subjects had not become cruel. They had become, in the paper's careful clinical language, less invested in the vertical dimension of human experience. The vertical dimension. She had read that phrase at 4 a.m. and sat with it for a long time. It was not the language of faith, but it was pointing at the same thing faith pointed at, the part of human experience that reached upward, that concerned itself with meaning and transcendence and the question of whether the universe was addressed to anyone, the part that made prayer possible, the part that made the difference between a person who could hear God and a person who could not. If the signal was deliberate, it was not a weapon. It was quieter than a weapon. It was the kind of thing you did not feel happening to you because it did not hurt. It simply made certain. Things feel less urgent, less real, less worth attending to. It made the vertical dimension go distant and muffled, the way a room sounds when you close the door. She turned this over in her mind and looked at the brown hills below and thought, I could be wrong. The correlation could be coincidental. The intent could be benign or absent. She listed these possibilities with the same discipline she brought to all her work. Scrupulous, fair, refusing to conclude beyond the evidence. And then, underneath the discipline, the other thing said, but what if you are not wrong? She looked out the helicopter window at the approaching desert, flat and pale and enormous, and she thought about the prayer she had prayed an hour ago. Give me eyes to see what this actually is. She had meant it. She meant it still. And she was aware, with the specific awareness of someone who has prayed long enough to know that the answers to honest prayers have a way of being more demanding than the questions, that she might already be seeing it. The field bag was in the cargo net beside her knee. The corner of the Bible was visible at the top of the side pocket. One of her colleagues, a young exobiologist named Peter Chen, who had completed his PhD the previous spring and still had the quality of a man who could not quite believe he was here, leaned across the aisle and said something to her. Had to say it twice over the rotor noise. "Are you nervous?" She thought about the question honestly. "No," she said. He nodded, reassured, misreading the answer. She did not correct him. What she was, she thought, was not nervous. What she was, and she held this thought carefully, the way you hold something that matters without gripping it, was clear, clearer than she had felt since the formation, appeared, since the subthreshold signal, since the email with the NASA administrator's name at the bottom. Not certain, not comfortable, clear. The helicopter banked west and the dry lake bed of Edwards opened out below them, enormous and pale as bone, and beyond it, arranged on the flat desert floor with a precision that made the surrounding infrastructure of the base look provisional by comparison, were the ships. Not the lights. The ships. In daylight, with distance between them and the ocean, with the flat desert stretched out around them as a scale reference, the formation that had appeared over the Pacific as a pattern of lights was revealed as something that had mass and structure and a geometry that the eye kept trying to resolve and kept failing to resolve, the shapes too regular in some dimensions and too asymmetrical in others, for any existing human category of aircraft or vessel or architecture to fully contain. The helicopter descended. Around Naomi, her colleagues pressed toward the windows with the look of people who had waited their entire careers for this moment and were being paid in full. She understood the feeling. She had felt it herself briefly when the formation first appeared. That clean electric recognition. We are not alone. We have never been alone. The universe is inhabited. She still believed that. She had always believed that, and her reasons for believing it had not changed. What had changed was her understanding of what inhabited it. The helicopter touched down on the Edwards tarmac. Ground crew in Air Force uniforms approached with the efficient purposefulness of people who had been briefed and were working hard not to show that the briefing had not fully prepared them. Naomi gathered her equipment and her field bag and climbed down onto the desert floor, and the heat hit her immediately. The specific. Dry furnace heat of the Mojave in the afternoon, the kind that felt honest after the air-conditioned unreality of the helicopter. She stood on the tarmac and looked at the ships, 47 of them on the desert floor, silent, motionless, casting shadows that were the wrong shape for the angle of the sun. The air around them did not shimmer with heat distortion, which meant they were not warm, which meant they were not producing heat, which meant whatever was inside them, or whatever they were made of, or whatever principle they operated on, was nothing her instruments were going to find in the frequency ranges she had been trained to look at. She thought, I am standing 60 yards from the most significant event in human history, and I am the only person on this tarmac who is afraid of it. Not afraid in the way that produces paralysis, afraid in the way that produces attention. She opened the second notebook, the one for everything else, and uncapped her pen and wrote one word at the top of the first page. She wrote, counterfeit. She did not know yet precisely what she meant by it. She knew her spirit did. She had learned, over years of listening to both her instruments and the quieter signal underneath them, to trust the one that did not require calibration. She capped the pen. She followed the ground crew toward the line of tents and equipment arrays that the Air Force had assembled at a careful distance from the ships. The ships did not move. They had the quality of things that were not waiting, that had no need to wait, because waiting implies uncertainty about the outcome, and these things, whatever they were, did not seem uncertain about anything. Chapter 4. Edwards. They had been given tents and badges and bottled water and very little else in the way of information, which Naomi had expected. The Air Force's approach to civilian advisory teams was consistent across every deployment she had been part of. Bring them close enough to be useful, keep them far enough from the operational picture to be manageable, and give them just enough detail to prevent the kind of freelancing that complicated after-action reports. She had been part of 3 such teams in her career and had learned to work within the architecture rather than against it, which meant she had set up her equipment in the assigned tent, introduced herself to the Air Force liaison officer assigned to the science team, and begun running her own analysis on the ships from a distance while she waited for someone to tell her what came next. The ships were 200 yards from the staging area, arranged in a formation on the dry lake bed that echoed the pattern they had held over the Pacific. The same spacing, the same geometry, translated from ocean to desert as if the ground beneath them was irrelevant to whatever organizing principle determined their positions. Up close, in daylight, they were larger than she had expected from the aerial footage. She had run the numbers on their dimensions from the satellite data on the flight out. Each ship approximately 40 meters in length, roughly ovoid in profile. The surface a material that absorbed rather than reflected light in a way that made them difficult to look at directly for more than a few seconds, not because they were bright, but because the eye kept failing to find a stable edge to rest on. They were the colour of something between dark water and polished graphite, and they cast shadows that, as she had noted from the helicopter, were the wrong shape for the angle of the sun. She had mentioned the shadows to her Air Force liaison, a Captain Reyes, who had written it in his notebook and said he would flag it for the technical team. She had not told him about the sub-threshold signal. Not yet. She was still working out who to tell and how to say it in language that would produce investigation rather than dismissal, and she had learned from long experience that the moment before a major discovery was the moment most vulnerable to being managed by people whose job was to manage things rather than understand them. The other scientists on the advisory team had been less restrained. She could hear them across the staging area, animated, generous with their theories, freely sharing the frameworks they had been building in their heads since the formation appeared. She listened without contributing, which was her habit in the early stages of any problem she did not yet understand, and what she heard was what she had expected, the vocabulary of wonder untempered by caution, the language of people who had already decided what this was and were now looking for evidence to confirm it. Peter Chen appeared at her elbow at 2 p.m. with 2 bottles of water and the look of a man who had been running on adrenaline since yesterday and was now discovering that adrenaline had a flaw. "They're saying contact in the next 2 hours, he said, handing her a bottle. "Someone in the military briefing leaked it. They've been receiving a secondary signal since this morning. Different from the name signal. More complex. The linguistics team thinks it's a request for direct communication. Like they're asking permission." "Asking permission," Naomi said. "That's what they're saying. Doesn't that—" He paused, searching for the word. "Doesn't that say something good? About intent? That they would ask?" Naomi looked at the ships. In the 2 hours since she had arrived on the tarmac, they had not moved, and had not changed, and had produced no reading on any instrument she had pointed at them, which was itself a kind of statement. The statement made by a thing that has decided to be exactly as knowable as it chooses to be, and no more. It says something, she said. I'm still working out what. Peter looked at her with the expression he sometimes had, which was the expression of someone who had been trained in the same discipline as Naomi, but had arrived at a different temperament, more open, less guarded, inclined toward the generous interpretation. She did not think this was wrong. She thought it was, right now, incomplete. You're not excited, he said, not accusingly, observationally. I am, she said. I'm just not only excited. Plus, at 3:45, everything changed in the way that things change when a bureaucracy finally finishes negotiating with itself, all at once, with the slightly breathless quality of a decision that has been ready for longer than the machinery took to make it. The staging area transformed in under 20 minutes from a collection of tents and equipment into something that resembled, uncomfortably, a stage set, a cleared space before the central ship, a line of cameras from every major news organization on Earth, a bank of satellite uplink equipment that would carry whatever happened next to every screen in every country in real time, and, at the center of it, a small group of carefully selected representatives, the UN Secretary-General, the heads of state of the 5 permanent Security Council members appearing via satellite on screens arranged in a semicircle, the NASA administrator, and, standing slightly to one side, in a way that she found simultaneously gratifying and isolating, 12 scientists, including Naomi. She had positioned herself at the left end of the science line, which gave her the best angle on the central ship and the worst angle on the cameras. She had her acoustic laptop open in its field case on the ground beside her foot and her portable spectrum analyzer in her jacket pocket and her second notebook open to a fresh page. She had also, before leaving the tent, said a very short prayer, which had consisted of 3 words: Lord, be here. She believed he was. She had always found it easier to believe this in open spaces, something about the sky's scale, the way it made the question of whether the universe was attended to feel less abstract. At 4:17, the surface of the central ship changed. Changed was the only word available to her, though it was inadequate. The material that had absorbed light all afternoon began, in a section approximately 4 meters wide and 3 meters tall, to do something different with it, not reflecting it, not transmitting it, but organizing it, the way a lens organizes light, gathering the desert afternoon into a quality of luminescence that was specific and intentional and profoundly, deeply beautiful in a way that Naomi recognized immediately as a choice. Whatever was about to come through that opening had decided how it wanted to look when it arrived. Around her she heard the sounds of the gathered crowd respond. Not words, not speech, just the involuntary exhalation of several hundred people encountering something that exceeded their available categories. Some of them, she noticed in her peripheral vision, had their hands to their mouths. Several were weeping. The cameras tracked forward. She wrote in her notebook, opening in central vessel, approximately 4 meters by 3 meters. Light behavior at aperture, organized, non-reflective, non-transmissive. Deliberate aesthetic presentation. Note, no heat signature change at aperture despite apparent luminescence. Confirms non-thermal light source,